Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy to be back here again with a new video. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. Why don't you stick around to see what kind of shocking true crime story I have for you today. And also please do subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. Alright, as always, I hope you guys are good and that you've had a good week. And also for this case, I hope none of you guys are short-tempered because this is going to be one of the most frustrating cases I've ever covered here on my channel. So I hope you can keep your emotions in check as you are watching this. So this week, we're going to be talking about the case of Joe Chinquay. And in this case, I will be talking about murder, mental health, and also substance abuse. So viewer discretion is advised. But right now, sit back, relax, and let me tell you all about the case of Joe Chinquay. Joe Chinquay was born on June 11th in 1971, and his full name is actually Giuseppe, and he was named after his grandfather, but his family and friends call him Joe. Joe was the first son of his parents, Nino and Maria Chinquay, who were Italian immigrants living in Australia. They were a very close family and they were very happy together. And then 4 years later, after Joe was born, that's when his younger brother Anthony was also born. And now they became a family of 4 living in Newcastle, Australia. And Joe was also a very likable guy as well. And he was very well liked by the other kids at school, but not only the kids, but also the teachers as well, because he was a social person. He was a very social person. He was able to hold down a conversation with just about anyone he talked to, and he made it easy to approach him and just talk to him. So he was an overall likable guy. Then after getting some really good grades in high school, Joe went to university, and then he graduated university in 1994 with his degree in civil engineering. And then after 2 months of traveling around Europe, he came back home, and that's when he started a job at a civil engineering firm in Newcastle. Then in 1995, while he was still at home, Joe decided to go out to a club with a few of his friends. And when they got there, that's when he met a young woman by the name of Anu Singh. And as soon as they started talking, Anu and Joe just hit it off completely. And they found some really good chemistry in each other. And just from that, Joe could see that Anu was a very beautiful woman and he wanted to have her in his life. Anu Singh was born on September 30, 1972 to her Indian-Australian parents, Paddy and Surinder Singh, who were both medical professionals. Anu's family migrated to Sydney, Australia in 1973 when she was still a baby. The family settled down in the suburb of Strathfield, and Anu ended up attending a Catholic high school. Then in 1990, that's when she graduated high school, and then in 1991, she moved to Canberra, where she attended university and studied for a double degree in economics and law at the Australian National University. Now, according to her father, she was also a happy-go-lucky child who was also very intelligent, but she did have some behavior and attachment issues, and these ended up causing her to have some serious mental health issues when she was just in her 20s. And according to her mom Paddy, her problems just ended up escalating even more in 1995. When Anu got to university, she met a guy by the name of Simon back in 1993, and they ended up dating, and their relationship ended up being a very serious relationship. And then at some point in the relationship, Anu ended up getting pregnant, but she decided not to keep the baby. So she terminated the pregnancy. However, this still took quite an effect on her. It became quite a traumatic experience for her. Her time in university was not really all that great. She was missing home, she missed her family, and on top of that, the hard times that she was having caused her to start using some illegal drugs. She was using meth, ecstasy, cocaine, speed, and acid between 1993 and 1996. And these drugs would cause her to have various hallucinations. And because things were not going so well for her at the university, she decided to postpone her studies for 1 year, and she went back home to try to regain some ground. Now, this brings us back to 1995 when she met Joe Chinquay at that club, and they started hitting things off, even though she was still in a relationship with Simon at the time. Then the time came for Anu to go back to university to continue her studies, so this meant she had to leave Joe back home in Sydney, and she headed back to Canberra. But as soon as she got back to university, her boyfriend Simon ended up finding out somehow that Anu was seeing another man back home, and this is when their relationship came to an end. Now that Joe was the only man that Anu was seeing at the time, their relationship ended up getting very serious. And by 1996, things got even more serious because now Joe was heavily in love with Anu. So much so that he would drive the 5 hours every weekend between Newcastle and Canberra just to see Anu. And then very early on Monday mornings, he would drive back the same 5 hours back to Newcastle so he can make it back in time for his shift at work. So he was very committed to Anu. Joe was also very supportive of Anu when it came to her health. Whenever she wasn't feeling well, he would never hesitate to just get on a flight and then go to see her. But even though Joe and Anu seemed to be having quite a good relationship, Joe's parents, on the other hand, were not so sure about it. Because according to them, the moment Joe got into this relationship, he started becoming a different person. Like this relationship was now changing him. They believed that Joe was being controlled by Anu. They also noticed that his extroverted nature would just somehow diminish whenever Anu was around him. Like he was now not so comfortable in being his social and conversational self. And it seemed like he would also be led by the nose by Anu. Now remember, Joe and his family were very close, so they would have their dinner time every day at 6 p.m. and this would be their time to connect and have some quality family time. But now that Joe was in a relationship with Anu, almost every day at 6:10 p.m. Anu would call Joe, interrupting this family dinner time. And Joe would indeed leave the table to go talk to Anu, and they would talk for about an hour or an hour and a half, causing Joe to forget about his dinner time with his family. And Anu actually knew that this was the time for Joe and his family to sit down and have dinner, because Joe's mother would tell her over the phone on a number of occasions that this was family dinner time. But it seemed like Anu didn't really respect that. Then in September of 1996, Joe and Anu decided to move in together, and they were now living in a townhouse in Anthill Street in the suburb of Downer. And the townhouse was also very close to Anu's university, so it became very convenient for her to be living with Joe in Downer. Now remember, I mentioned that Anu was on some illegal drugs. She was taking some recreational drugs. Well, at this point, even though she was no longer using the drugs, she was experiencing some very bad withdrawals. And she also fell under depression. She also developed a condition called bulimia. And this is an eating disorder that causes a person to binge eat food and then try on a variety of methods to vomit out the food. And this is a potentially life-threatening condition. And when she started experiencing this, she would binge eat a lot of food, and then she would force herself to vomit or sometimes purge herself of the food by taking laxatives or by fasting for long periods of time. And this definitely had an effect on her. It caused her to lose a tremendous amount of weight, and her parents were very concerned about her because she would still complain to them that she was still feeling fat, she was still looking fat, even though she had already lost so much weight at this point. By May of 1997, Anu started becoming very obsessed with her health, and she started believing that she was losing her muscles and her muscles were deteriorating. And then she started going to the doctor, but the doctor told her that physically there is nothing wrong with her. However, there could be something psychologically affecting her and causing her to behave like this, but Anu was adamant that something was definitely wrong with her physically, and she wasn't taking any of the advice of the doctor. Then a few months later, Anu somehow got convinced that she had contracted AIDS. And after this, she talked to a friend and said that she felt like it was unfair that out of her and Joe, she's the only one who contracted AIDS. So to rectify this, she wanted to take some of her infected blood and she wanted to put it on Joe's toothpaste so he could also get this disease that was not even there. But once Anu did go for a blood test, she was proven wrong, and now she realized that she didn't have AIDS. However, now she started convincing herself that she was suffering from a nervous system condition. Then her parents spoke to her and they finally managed to convince her to go see a psychiatrist. And when she did go, the psychiatrist tried to recommend some medication that could help her with her issues, but Anu wasn't having it. She was not about to take that medication, going against the professional recommendations of her psychiatrist, and this had her parents very, very concerned. Anu's parents tried everything they could to try to convince her, to try to show her that whatever she was suffering from is actually mental. She was having some mental conditions, but Anu was just convinced that there was nothing mentally wrong with her and she was just fine. Whatever was happening to her was more physical than it was mental. Anu's parents also tried to get some help from the mental health crisis team, and they tried to apply to have her admitted to their institution. However, since Anu didn't show any signs of being a danger to herself and to other people, she could not be admitted. And also her parents were told that since she herself didn't want to be admitted into the mental institution, they could not admit her against her will, without her permission. So at this point, there was nothing that the mental health crisis team could do. And then after this, Anu started saying that these undiagnosed conditions that she was having were the cause of an ipecac syrup that she was taking. And this syrup, what it would do is it would help with induced vomiting. It would help make vomiting easier. So she was now blaming everything on the syrup, and she was also blaming Joe for having taken this syrup. Apparently, Joe had mentioned this syrup randomly in conversation, and he wasn't telling her to take it or anything like that. He wasn't implying that she should take it for her conditions, but she was now blaming him for everything that this syrup was now causing her to experience. And remember, Joe had been very supportive to Anu the entire time with everything that she was going through. But now that she had convinced herself that this syrup that he mentioned in conversation randomly was making her sick, she was convinced that Joe wanted her to be sick even more. And on top of that, she was also blaming him for any other health issue she was experiencing at the time. And now Anu started going to her friends and some people that she knew, and she started talking to them about how she felt like rampaging, and she also felt like ending Joe's life and then ending her own life. So she was spiraling out of control at this point. Now, an interesting thing that she also said was that she was studying law. And with that being said, she also knew some psychiatric texts that would help her convince people that she was insane. So if she was ever to be able to go through with killing Joe and then maybe getting arrested, she would only plead insanity, and she would know how to run the system to make sure that she is seen as insane. Anu also had this friend of hers by the name of Madhavi Rao, and Madhavi was also a very good law student. She was very smart. But in this friendship of hers with Anu, it seemed like Anu was more of the dominant one, and Anu would get Madhavi to do whatever she wanted. Then at one point, Anu came up with the idea that she and Madhavi go over to the library and research on suicide and assisted suicide. And her parents were also still very concerned about her, so they decided to contact the dean of her university to find out if she was still going to her classes. But unfortunately, they were told that since Anu is an adult, the university cannot give out that information without permission. And then they also tried once again to apply for the mental health crisis team to come and help out, but it turns out that the applications for this institution take a very long time to be processed. So the family still had to wait even more to hear back from them while everything was still happening like this. Now Anu was talking to anyone who could listen about what she wanted to do to Joe. So she was talking to her classmates, her friends, and even just acquaintances. And none of these people even thought to try to talk her out of it, or to try to warn Joe and tell him about this, or to try to just stop her and get her the help that she needed. None of them did anything. No one batted an eye when she was talking about killing Joe and possibly taking her own life. Then, as the month of August was about to end, Anu and Madhavi started talking to this classmate of theirs. And before this meeting, Anu had actually talked to this guy before, and she wanted to know if he could get her a gun or if he knew someone who could get her a gun. And then there was a time again when she contacted him to find out if he had the gun for her, showing him that she was serious about this. Some reports say that Anu might have changed her mind about the gun and started asking for heroin instead, but some reports say that this classmate might have said to her that killing herself by overdose on heroin would be much better than having to shoot herself. So there isn't any confirmation on how that conversation went down. Then a couple of days later, Anu and Madhavi went over to the house of this classmate to get more details about the option of using heroin. And this classmate just told them that it would basically be painless and it would also be very quick. All that she had to do was just inject a lethal dose of it and she will stop breathing in just a matter of minutes. He also told them that it would cost about $50 to $100 to get the lethal dose, and Anu then told him that she was going to come back to buy it when she had the money. Then about a week later, still in 1997, Anu contacted this classmate again to tell him that she now had the money to buy the heroin. So Anu, Madhavi, and the classmate met up at the classmate's house, and Anu bought $250 worth of heroin. And then after this, the classmate decided to show her how to inject herself and another person, and he did this by injecting them both with the heroin and then injecting himself with the heroin as well. Then in September of 1997, Anu went to the university counselor and she started saying that Joe was being verbally and physically abusive to her. She said that Joe even blamed this abuse on her because he was never an abusive person before, so she must be the problem. And then she also said that if she could leave him, she could, but now she cannot do that because she is depending on him financially. And as you might have guessed by now, none of this was true. This was all a lie. She was making it up. Then in October of 1997, Anu went back to the classmate's house who sold her heroin, and this time she bought over $500 worth of heroin. That's an entire gram of heroin. And now this classmate was getting a bit curious. He wanted to know exactly why she wanted to buy so much heroin. And all that she said to him was she was planning on ending her own life and she was going to take someone else with her, but she didn't say exactly who. And then after this, with the help of her friend Madhavi, Anu got her hands on some Rohypnol, also known as roofie or the date rape drug. And this is a very powerful sedative or tranquilizer that could knock a person out cold. And they got this Rohypnol from a classmate of theirs, a female classmate whose name I'm guessing was also never publicized. This female classmate told Anu that if she was going to use the roofie drug with heroin, then she only needed one roofie tablet to knock a person out, not more. And she told her this after giving her 15 Rohypnol tablets in total. Then on Monday, on October 27th in 1997, Anu decided to host a dinner party for her and Joe, and she invited her friends, classmates, and some acquaintances to come over and celebrate with them. And this was actually a farewell party for her and Joe because she planned on killing Joe and then ending her own life after the party was done. Then as the dinner party was going on, the people who knew what Anu wanted to do to Joe that night, they thought that now she was just joking about it, because at this point she was seen being loving and joking and happy with Joe. So they thought maybe she was just joking about it and she was not going to go through with it. And with that being said, they also felt no need to tell Joe about this, and again, no one said anything to him. Then once the party came to a close, people started leaving, and once it was just Anu and Joe in the house, she decided to put her plan into action. She took a few Rohypnol tablets and she crushed them, and then she put them in Joe's coffee. And then once Joe drank the coffee, this knocked him out almost immediately, and now she knew that she was almost there. Then she took the syringe that already had concentrated heroin inside of it, and she was going to inject Joe with it while he was still passed out. However, fortunately, since the heroin was concentrated, it ended up being congealed. So basically it meant she couldn't use it, she couldn't inject it out of the syringe and into Joe's system. And Joe ended up waking up the next morning with no idea of what happened to him or what could have happened to him. And now that this first attempt was unsuccessful, Anu decided to host another dinner party on October 24th in 1997, and she invited her friends again and her classmates and acquaintances, and again she was telling them exactly what she was going to do to Joe, and again no one believed her. They saw her as someone who just wanted to get the attention, so they didn't think that she was actually going to go through with this. Joe didn't know about this party though, so when he came back from work, he was kind of surprised to see that there were people in his house. But as soon as he got the gist of what's happening, he just started joining in the party, and he was talking to some people, having conversations with some of the people there. And apparently he was in a very good mood because he had just bought himself a new car, and he was also looking forward to going on vacation pretty soon. So he was in a very good mood. And the party went on again without any issues. And then in the early hours of October 25th, that's when the attendees of the party started leaving. And Anu's friend, Madhavi, was the last person to leave at around 6 a.m. on that morning of October 25th. And when she got to her flat, she started telling her roommates that Anu was going to kill Joe. And she tried to kill him the first time around, but that was not successful. And when the roommates were asking her why Anu wanted to kill Joe, Madhavi told them that she wanted to do this because she was blaming Joe for every single medical issue she was experiencing at that time. So she wanted to kill him and then kill herself. Then between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. on October 25th in 1997, one of the people who were at the party on the previous night, a woman by the name of Tanya, started saying that she was going to tell Joe what Anu was planning to do to him. Then once Anu heard about what Tanya wanted to do, that she wanted to tell Joe everything, this is when she and Madhavi, as well as a man by the name of Leonard, went over to Tanya's house to try to convince her not to tell Joe anything. Anu told Tanya that the only reason she drugged Joe was so Joe wouldn't be awake when she commits suicide. So now Anu wanted to convince Tanya not to say anything to Joe. Then later on the night of October 25th, Anu called up that guy Leonard again, and somehow their conversation was recorded on his answering machine. And she was talking to him about how she was worried about the long-lasting effects of Rohypnol, because now when she gave them to Joe, he was knocked out for 15 hours straight. And when he did wake up, he was still under the effect of the drug, but he thought that he was just tired. He thought that his body was just tired. He had no idea that he had been drugged. Then after that, Anu called up Madhavi and asked Madhavi to bring over some food to her house. And when Madhavi did come with the food, for some reason Anu started getting into an argument with her, and Anu was now accusing Madhavi of being the one who drugged Joe. And this was a very confusing fight. And Madhavi was completely taken aback by this because she was now very confused. So she decided to leave after this confusing fight. Then once Madhavi had left, Anu started crushing some more roofie tablets, and then she put them again in Joe's coffee. And then after he drank it, he was passed out again. However, this time, Anu ended up being successful in injecting him with the heroin. Then on the morning of October 26th in 1997, Anu decided to go over to Madhavi's house, and she woke her up at around 8 a.m. And then after this, they went back to Joe and Anu's house, and when they got there, they saw that Joe was still knocked out on the bed, but he had this blue color on him. However, he was still breathing. Then after this, Anu and Madhavi drove over to the ATM so Madhavi could take out $250 and give it to Anu. Then they got into another argument, and this time Madhavi decided to walk back home, and then Anu drove to the house of the classmate who sold her the heroin the first time around and also showed her how to use it. And when she got to his place, she bought another $250 worth of heroin with the money that she got from Madhavi. And after buying the heroin, Anu tried to call Madhavi a couple of times, but she wasn't picking up the phone. Then eventually Madhavi did decide to pick up the phone, and then after they talked, they met up, and then they drove over to Joe and Anu's house, where Joe was still lying unconscious on the bed and was still looking very blue. And for some reason, when they saw that Joe was breathing very slowly, Madhavi decided to go over to Leonard's house, the guy who helped them convince Tanya not to tell Joe anything, and she told him that Joe found out that Anu was trying to drug him and now he was threatening to leave her. So Anu decided to drug him again to keep him from leaving, but this time Joe wasn't waking up. And then Anu, on the other hand, was calling the female classmate who sold her the Rohypnol drug, and she wanted to get some help from her. She was telling this female classmate that Joe wasn't waking up, she had drugged him and now he wasn't waking up, and she wanted to get some help from her and she didn't know what to do. But this female classmate told her that she wanted absolutely nothing to do with this and Anu should call the emergency services. However, Anu thought calling the emergency services was a bad idea because she believed that if Joe found out, he would end up leaving her and he would be very angry with her. Then the female classmate told her that if she doesn't call the emergency services, then she's going to be facing charges of murder. Then Anu finally decided to call the emergency services. But when she did, the most that she said was that she wanted to report a drug overdose because she was very evasive with a lot of other information, including the address to her house so an ambulance can be sent over to Joe. But she didn't want to give him that information. She would start talking about something else instead. Then as they kept on pushing, she finally gave them her name and her address. But she gave them the wrong address and the wrong name. For some reason, she said her name was now Olivia. But then finally, she ended up giving them the correct address. And when the paramedics finally arrived, they found Joe still unconscious on the bed, and he was naked from the waist down, and he also had brown liquid that was coming out of his mouth, and his stomach was also bloated. And they tried to resuscitate him as quickly as they possibly could, and while they were doing this, Anu was seen very nervous and she was begging them to save him, and she was also telling them that she only gave him roofie tablets and also injected him with heroin just so he wouldn't stop her from ending her own life. But unfortunately, no matter how hard the paramedics tried, Joe Chinque ended up losing his life that night. The police were now involved in this, and Anu was quickly arrested and put in custody for questioning of what exactly happened that night. And then later that night, Joe's family were starting to wonder where he is and if he's okay. Then his mother tried to call his phone over and over without anyone picking up. And then finally, when a police sergeant picked up the phone, that's when other police officers knocked on her door. Then when Joe's mother answered the door and wanted to know what they wanted, they told her that they had to talk to her about her son. Then as soon as they said that to her, Joe's mother just knew that something wrong had happened to her son, and she also knew that somehow Anu was involved. So before they could even get into details, Joe's mother just collapsed into despair. The family then had to go to the morgue to identify Joe's body, and as soon as the sheet was pulled down to reveal his face, his mother just collapsed from the pain she was feeling, because now it was sinking in that she had truly lost her son. When the autopsy was done, it was discovered that the cause of Joe's death was asphyxiation while under the influence of heroin and Rohypnol. And it was also said that Joe had so much heroin in his system that it was not possible to determine if she had given him the heroin in one big dosage or if she had done it over different periods of time in smaller doses. During the investigation, the police looked through Joe's daily planner. They saw that he planned to move on October 27th in 1997, and they also found out that his luggage was not in the house, so this gave him the idea that Joe was planning on leaving Anu. Investigators also searched Madhavi's house, and they found some really interesting stuff. They found alcohol swabs, Rohypnol, pamphlets about arteries and drugs, and they also found used syringe packets. And for some reason, they also found Anu's diary in Madhavi's house, and it was all torn up. But when they looked at the entries of this diary, they saw that Anu was suffering from some kind of depression, and also that she had Joe's death planned out for quite some time. Then the police decided to arrest Madhavi as well, and she was charged with murder, attempted murder, unlawful and felonious slaying, and administering of a powerful drug. Her bail was set at $100,000 and her parents helped pay all of it. And then just 3 days later, she was released under the condition that she stays under the supervision of her parents the entire time. At first, Anu and Madhavi were going to have one trial, and their trial began on October 6th, 1998. But then the trial ended up being stopped when the judge decided to make some new changes. The judge believed that if they were to be tried in the same trial, then all the evidence used up against Anu, or the evidence collected against Anu, would cause an unfair and an unjust trial against Madhavi. I'm guessing the judge wanted to make sure that Madhavi gets tried on the things that she actually did, instead of also taking the fall for the things that Anu could have done on her own. Anu's trial took place on the 22nd of March in 1999, and she pled not guilty by reason of diminished responsibility, which means when she committed the crime, she was suffering from a mental disorder that caused her to have insufficient moral capability, and this also meant if the judge did agree that she was not guilty based on reasons of diminished responsibility, she would only be found guilty of manslaughter and not murder. Her defense team argued that yes, when she committed the crime, she knew that she was breaking the law, but she cannot be held fully responsible because of her mental conditions at the time. They argued that she was suffering from untreated borderline personality disorder, and she was also suffering from major depressive disorder. They also claimed that she was lost in some delusion that she was suffering from a degenerative disease as well. However, the prosecution argued that the whole thing was premeditated, cold-blooded, and deliberate. They argued that if Anu was as depressed as she claimed to have been, then she would have gone through with the plan of ending her own life as well. They also took the torn-up diary that belonged to her that was found at Madhavi's house, and they used it as evidence to prove that she was mentally competent when she did what she did, and so she wasn't suffering from any mental conditions. What the prosecution also talked about was that it took Joe 2 days to actually die, and in those 2 days, Anu was continually injecting him with the heroin, and she was watching him die. She didn't do anything possible to save his life, and when she was on the call with the emergency responder, she was also very evasive, and she was also taking time to give out the correct information, which took away the chances of Joe's life being saved. And while she was in custody, she wrote up a few letters about what exactly happened that led to Joe's death. She said that when she and Madhavi went to the library to research about suicide, she also read up that loved ones end up just moving on and remarrying someone else once a loved one of theirs ended up passing away. So because of that, she decided that Joe had to come with her. However, the prosecution also tried to use this as evidence against her as well, saying that she was sane of mind when she did what she did, and that it was deliberate, selfish, and wrong. The trial ended on June 24th in 1999, and Anu Singh was not found guilty of murder by reason of diminished responsibility, and she was only found guilty of manslaughter. She was sentenced to only 10 years in prison, with a minimum of 4 years. And on top of that, she only served 2 years in prison. And when it comes to Madhavi's trial, it took place on December 10th in 1999, and she pled not guilty to all the charges that were laid against her. And her defense team argued that she had no responsibility in Joe's death. And this was because when she saw Joe on the morning of October 26th, just before the night he died, she told Anu that she no longer wanted anything to do with this. And so that immediately removed her involvement in whatever happened next. And with that being said, Madhavi was not found guilty on any charge that she was facing. And just like that, she was allowed to go free. And the judge said, yes, she knew that Joe's life was in danger, but this was not proof enough to say that she also had the same criminal intentions as Anu. And you can just imagine how Joe's family felt. I mean, this was not justice enough for Joe. This was not justice at all. And especially when it comes to the fact that there were also people who knew exactly what Anu was going to do and still chose not to say anything. Anu ended up being granted parole in 2001 after only having served 2 years of her sentence. And she ended up getting a PhD and has since moved on with her life to this day. And the same can be said about her friend Madhavi, who changed her name and then moved to the United States. And yeah guys, that was the case of Joe Chinquay. This is one of the most unfair cases I've ever come across. The level of injustice done to Joe and his family just baffles me, and my heart just breaks thinking about what they had to go through. But in spite of all that, I send my deepest sympathies to the Chinquay family, and I do hope that Joe, wherever he is resting in eternal peace. But that is all that I have for you guys on this case. Please do let me know what you think about it in the comments. I will be looking forward to interacting with you. And if you enjoyed watching, please do me a big favor and press the like button so my channel can reach out to more people. I would seriously appreciate that. And thank you guys again for hanging out with me today. As always, I do appreciate you taking time out of your day to support my channel. And again, if you are new here, if it's your first time watching, please be part of the family and subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. With that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. So until then, enjoy the rest of your day, take care of yourselves, and cheers.